Got
Bam!
it.
See? Gotta get these old
All right.
folks out of here, you know?
All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In case Major Ingram hasn't told you, my name is Evan Muxon. We met at the 10th Mountain Division when I was a scrappy captain and he was a crusty old major, even more crusty than he is now. Currently, I am the 446 Airlift Wing Historian. It's an active duty civilian job, and I'm based at Joint Base Lewis McChord Field, Washington State. Great place if you ever get up here. And today I'm going to talk to you about the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. So this is the brief agenda.
Hear me okay? Y'all hear? Okay.
This is the brief agenda. Go ahead and take a look at that really quick. Pretty simple, pretty cut and dry. But understand, no matter how much I tell you today, it's going to pale in comparison to what these battles actually were, because you could do an entire lesson just on each one of these battles, because that's how detailed they were, that's how long they were, and that's how significant they are to, well, world history, not just American. So I already told you a little bit who I am. The reason why I'm speaking to you is that before this, I was actually stationed with the 18th Wing at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan. I've walked approximately 30 to 40% of the battlefield of Okinawa, all by my lonesome and sometimes with people. And I have walked the battlefield of Iwo Jima 6 times and covered about 60% of it. There are some parts of it that are too dangerous to this day and you can't even go into. I've even gone as far as to explore about 2,000 meters of the now 11 square miles of tunnels. So the reason why I'm talking to you is I've seen these battlefields, I know what they are, and I can talk to you in detail about them, but unfortunately we can't get to that deep today. If you have any questions while I'm talking, get Major Ingram's attention and he'll let me know. All right? So the importance of the Pacific Theater, at its height, this is what Japan looked like in 1939. Everything you see there, either Japan controlled or was going to control. See, Japan had 3 major objectives when they began World War II in 1931 when they invaded Manchuria. Yes, I said that right. Japan kicked off World War II in 1931, well before Hitler was actually being active in his gathering of European countries. Japan had to do 3 things. They had to remove Western ideology out of the Asia theater. Asia for the Asians as long as Japan's in charge, because they did not like the idea of Western ideologies coming in and they wanted to be the dominant power. The second thing they had to do was control the economics. If they couldn't remove the power, but then they'll control the economics, and that way they can control the power that's there. A good example of that is you look right down here on the southern border of China, all these major areas, Japan realized, much like these islands, you don't need to control all the islands, you just need to control a few of them, and that will control the surrounding area, and you get all the economics and all the major shipping ports through here. The third and final thing they had to do was remove the largest threat to their dominance in the Pacific theater, and that was obviously the United States. Then we get December 7th, 1941. By 1944, 1945, it's an entirely different story. Japan's extent, its height, peaked in 1939 to 1941. By 1942, things are shifting into not their favor. While they have control of a lot of the islands, they are spread over massive tracts of water and land. It's not like Germany where everything's kind of controlled and centralized in Europe and they can get to it relatively quickly. You're talking days and weeks of travel on a boat or hours upon hours in a plane to get where you need to go. That's a very hard area to control. Now, what you see there is a map it's used for a lot of discussions, but the idea of island hopping is a bit deceptive in its nature because, yes, we did hop from island to island, but we did not go to every single island. We only needed to go to the ones that controlled what we needed to control. For example, we did not need to go to all the Carolina Islands when we could control them with Peleliu, Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. We didn't need to go there. And that's how we kind of achieved the island hopping, is we only went where we had to go. Let's get on to Iwo Jima. Now, you probably may or may not have seen this map before. It's obviously a topography map. You could do land nav off of this, although I've been on that island. You don't want to do land nav. It's just ungodly hot. And if you think down there in Alabama is hot, you got nothing on Iwo Jima. The island itself emits heat because it's actually, the whole island is an active volcano. So whatever the temperature is ambient outside, add about 10 to 15 degrees, and that's just what the island's emitting up from your feet. It's horribly unpleasant to be there. But we had to go there. But does anybody know why before I get there? And you can already see the answers. And here's the big reason why. As we were getting ready for, this is Operation Iceberg, by the way, as we're getting ready for Operation Downfall, which is the attack on the mainland, we would send planes up from Tinian over here, all the way through, thanks, Trey, all the way through up to Tokyo. The problem was Iwo Jima, which is right here, if you can see my cursor, it could engage the planes from about the halfway point from Tinian all the way to the halfway point to the mainland, and then radio back to the mainland because they had radars and airfields there that could pick up all the US bombers. On average, we were losing 18 to 22% of all bombers every time we sent a run up through this alleyway here. We didn't have control of anything over here that could reach it. The Philippines are still down over here. They couldn't reach to it. They couldn't reach the mainland as easily because Okinawa was right here. So the best way is to go from Tinian, which is where the 2 atomic bombs took off from, past Iwo Jima, get engaged, and then get engaged. And pretty much from about this point here till they got back to this point, the bombers were almost constantly engaged. So that's the big reason why. So we needed a clear path to conduct air raids against Japan, and we needed those airfields taken out of commission. Most importantly, we needed those radars to stop operating, because this is what we were looking for. Now, I'll redress this later at the last slide, but just take a good look at that, and you can see that the United States was planning something massive, a 2-fronted assault onto the Japanese mainland. Operation Downfall, Coronet focused on Tokyo, Olympic focused on what is called Kyushu. Now let's look at the defenses of Iwo Jima. This is a little bit different of a map, and as you can see, where it's highlighting is all the known and possible bunkers, caves, pillboxes, airfields, anything they could think of that they might need, it was here. Airfield number 3 was going to be put here, but airfields 1 and 2 are right here. In fact, 2 is still there today, and that is the middle one right here. And that's the one, if you fly in, you'll actually land on that airfield, and then you proceed to walk the battlefield here. Now, pretty much from about this line down, where I'm moving my cursor, that's the extent of the battlefield that I've been able to explore on Iwo Jima. This is called the rock quarry, and we're going to get into why this is significant, but this is one of the 3 major obstacles that faced the Marines as they came ashore. Then you have the invasion beaches, and then you had Mount Suribachi. Now, when the invasion happened, and we'll get to that in detail, you'll understand why these 3 things are being highlighted this way. The other problem we had was, notice this. These are highly concentrated defensive clusters of fighting. Up in this one here is where you'll find what's called meat grinder. And it earned its name literally because the humans are being ground up like meat, both Japanese and Americans. And you'll hear me refer to the Japanese as Imperials, because it's important that you understand there's a distinction between the Japanese Imperials in 1944-45 and the Japanese self-defense forces that we partner with today. Now let's get to the invasion. Any questions so far? I know I'm moving a little fast, but limited time, so if there's any questions. Awesome. Bombardment. They wanted almost 100 days. They got about 72 days of aerial bombardment, and the Marines desperately wanted 10 days of naval bombardment. Navy gave them 3 because in their logic, well, it was a waste of munitions and it would tip off that we're going to invade them. To which the question is always asked, well, then what were the 70 days of aerial bombardment? Were they just a hello, we're here in the neighborhood, or were they tipping them off? I mean, you have to understand, Japan knew where we were going before we went there. And that's why the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa were so costly, is they prepared adequately for what was coming. Now, the frogmen, you may or may not know this, but just a few days before, in fact, I think the day or 2 before the invasion, some frogmen, who we now know as Navy SEALs, went ashore. And they were there to literally just do a scouting mission for the bombardment on Suribachi. They knew Suribachi was going to be heavily fortified. They just didn't know how. Unfortunately, some lieutenant saw the frogmen and decided to engage them. And a lot of the areas on Suribachi were pinpointed because they could see the muzzle flashes. You'll see later in pictures what I mean by that. The Imperial plan was pretty simple. They were going to utilize, at that time, the 18 square miles of tunnels on an 8 square mile island. That's a lot of tunnels on a small island. They're going to use those caves, reinforced bunkers, things of that nature. Now, the 109th Division was about 20 to 21,000 strong, but they were in terrible shape. In fact, one of the accounts written by a lieutenant would talk about how the conditions, because they almost lived underground the entire time, were so terrible that when they got a half a cup of rice for every meal, that was like a really big deal for them. He also talked about how it was so hot, they would often sit around just absolutely stark naked because it was too hot to put any clothes on, and the clothes weren't drying out. You know, he's described one as, see if I get this right, my constant companion were the cockroaches and the spiders, who, if I was lucky, wouldn't bite me that day. And that's what the conditions were like for them. Their ability to put up the defense they did is kind of a trademark to the determination of the Imperials to delay the Americans. The American plan was very simplified. And this is, again, very simplified. They wanted to soften the island, invade the island, and seize the island, and take it out of the fight and away from the Imperial arsenal. It was significant because it was the first truly Japanese land that we were going to be securing. Not that we were taking away from them, but we were taking away their actual territory. My apologies. This is kind of what the battle plans look like. You get an idea of what it's going to be, but something that you need to pay attention to is this rock right here, Fotatsu Rock. That was actually completely underwater in 1945. If you go there today, it is completely exposed and the actual coastline is down here. That's because the whole island is still rising out of the water, and it's actually getting bigger at a, think about the rate of somewhere around 0.5 meter every year. So it's getting fairly large. Now the Japanese sector over here, you can see these areas kind of line up to where those defensive clusters were that you saw on the previous map. Don't worry, I'll overlay them for you. This is what an actual photo of the aerial bombardment over Iwo Jima. This right here is the road that connected the airfields. You can just see the airfield is going to get ready to start right here. That's airfield number 1. You can even see the craters from previous aerial bombardments. Out of those whole 72 days of aerial and naval bombardments, and Major Ingram knows the answer to this, so he can't answer. How many of the defenders do you think they killed during that bombardment? Anyone? Just shout it out. Who said 100? Because they're right.
Oh.
72 days of heavy bombardment. 72 days of heavy bombardment, and they estimated they might have killed 100 or wounded up to 100. That ought to tell you how detailed and successful their tunnel network was. This is the United States Navy deciding to give a facelift to Mount Suribachi. These guys are lined up in row, and they are just unleashing hell upon Suribachi. Right here on the left-hand side of this picture, you see Mount Suribachi, and these are the Coast Guardsmen who are going ashore, driving the Marines ashore. Believe it or not, the Coast Guard, the Marines, and the Navy were the forwarding forces at Suribachi. In fact, for most of these vehicles that you see during the Pacific Theater, it was guardsmen who were driving them. Now, here's the battle. The plan for the Americans, like I said, soften, invade, seize. They're going to cut the island in two. And I highlighted the lines of advancement. You can see that later. But they're going to cut the island in two, take Suribachi out of the fight, and then sweep over the rest of the island. These are the beaches you can go to today. I have been to red, from red all the way to blue. Green is, this becomes very, very rocky very quickly. No, I haven't recalled anybody being there lately. But this gives you a better idea of what they're going to do. See, these guys are directly attacking the rock quarry, sees this airfield, and these guys are the cut. They are going to cut the island in two and take out Suribachi. Now, here's how the Japanese defenses looked like over the American plan. Now, this lines up approximately. It's not a perfect lineup, but you get the idea. Now, you notice up here, we have this alternate location. Well, what they didn't account for is that this is a lot of rocks, and they would have to go all the way around Iwo Jima one way or the other, exposing themselves to fire. It's why they chose this particular landing area here. And this is them coming ashore right now. If you look closely here at Suribachi at the top, you can see how it still has a lot of its dark vegetation right here. But on this side, it's all bleached. It's still bleached to this day. And that's the bombardment of the Navy. This is green too, right here. And you can see how it gets rocky all throughout here. But this is them coming ashore. This is the one wave, this is the second wave, and here's the third wave. Now, what the funny thing is that Kobayashi actually allowed them to come ashore. Unlike everywhere else in the Pacific where they got engaged almost immediately after they hit the beach, he allowed them to come to shore. And there's a reason for that. And there's the reason. Look very closely. This is the berm that they had to get up. And this berm is about 15 to 20 feet. That sand is not like any other sand that you would find at your white sandy beaches, where you might sink into ankle deep. You were sinking in here to mid-calf deep. Now try to put a track vehicle or a Jeep on that and look very closely in the picture on the right-hand side, and that's what happens. The Jeep just sunk in. The Americans got so clustered on the beaches, that's when the Japanese opened up for them from the rock quarry, Mount Suribachi, and the hidden pillboxes along the top of the berm. What you can't see is that about 150 feet from this berm, there's pillboxes, and that's where they began. But this gives you a better idea. You can see that these guys are sinking in, and all their gear is sinking in, and nothing is moving quickly off this beach. It took them 72 hours to get enough and get moving and accomplish some of the most intense fighting the Marines had seen in the entire Pacific. Here's another shot of the berm from a Marine reporter's signature. The weird thing about this is you can see this guy's still digging it. Whenever you dig into those tunnels, dig into that sand, about 60% of it falls back in, no matter how much you take out. This is a mortar section getting ready to launch onto Mount Suribachi. And Major Ingram, if anybody can tell me what millimeter that mortar is, they deserve extra credit.
120.
Not even close. All right. Who else? Who do you think can?
81? 81?
It's a 60.
Ah, all right. I was wrong.
All right. Who can guess what these three guys are lucky enough to do?
Oh, I know.
Just shout out the end.
I told him I was going to give him a demonstration of what a Marine version of this looks like. But,
These guys are sweeping for landmines with their knives. That you'll notice the two white lines on the picture. That's so the tracked vehicles later that they come ashore, as they're not wrecked like this one is here and this one is here, can be pulled up and the Marines can walk safely and drive safely up the beach. But it took them everything they had and then some. This is a first aid station at the bottom of the berm. It was one of the few semi-safe locations. The issue is that the Imperials almost exclusively targeted NCOs, officers, and medics. And they had every point of this island zeroed in. So if they wanted to put artillery there, they're going to put artillery there. If they wanted to put a mortar there, they're going to put a mortar there. In fact, John Bastiglione, the hero of Guadalcanal and fought at Iwo Jima, he actually died because he was pinpointed by a mortar when he was trying to get people up to airfield number one. He was trying to move Marines up to airfield number one, and that's when he got caught in a mortar blast with about 5 or 6 of the Marines. And when I say it was costly, this is what I mean. No, every single one of those Marines has been repatriated, but this is still, there's a thing about Iwo Jima, and that's why Marines find it very, very touchy, is that it's the only battle that they technically lost but won. And that's a very sore subject for them. And this is what I mean by that. We took ashore 3 divisions. We walked off with 2. A division at this time is approximately 20,000 individuals. There are still 76 odd Marines missing on Iwo Jima right now. Every year they do bring ground penetrating radar and they try to find basically the remains that are left, because there's still an estimated 600 to 800 Imperials missing. Some people put that upward as high as 2,000. The killed estimate is, the more conservative estimate is 18,000. The true estimate is probably closer to 19. And there was only 216 captured. The reason why those were captured is because they were far too injured to fight. And that's the only reason they were allowed to be captured, is they couldn't commit suicide. You had 15 miles on an island that's barely 8 square miles that assisted the Imperial defenses. Pay attention to bullet number 3, because that is going to come back again and again and again. I apologize for the typo, but they're instructed to fight to the last man. Going to Iwo Jima was considered a death sentence or a suicide mission. They were not expected to be taken captive, or be removed from that island. They were expected to kill 10 Americans first, or whatever they could. The battle itself actually lasted just over around 37 days. And just over 100 days, the last known defender was killed. But pay attention to this. In 1947, the last 3 defenders finally surrendered. That is how complete the tunnel system was on Iwo Jima. They also encountered almost no Imperial living. They would see them occasionally dead, but even that was kind of rare. But the one that really ought to hit it home, and you saw the cemetery photos, is 1 out of every 3 U.S. personnel to step foot on Iwo Jima was maimed. Not just wounded, but maimed. What I mean by that is they were missing something. A finger, an arm, a leg, an eye. They were seriously, egregiously wounded. I think it was 1 out of every 3 Marines qualified for more than 1 Purple Heart or Bronze Star. It was the worst battle the Marines have ever seen. And it has the most Medal of Honors awarded out of any of the battles in World War II. Second is Okinawa. Okay, before I get moving on to Okinawa, is there any questions that you want to have about answer to Iwo Jima? Now, I grant that I gave it kind of a once over, but due to time constraints, I had to kind of pick and choose what I was going to say. Any questions about Iwo Jima, though?
Any questions? All right.
Awesome. Okinawa. This island is 61 miles at its longest, 18 miles at its widest. That's important later because that is not big. And yet, when we get to the invasion, you'll understand why that's significant. Why did we go to Okinawa? Well, there's a very simple answer for that. Preparation for downfall, airfields. And when I say airfields, I mean airfields. These are all the known semi-improved airfields on Okinawa. That's all of them. And we wanted them badly because this was large enough to house a large American contingent to launch onto Operation Downfall. This had enough airfields to accommodate every aircraft size, shape, and form in the American arsenal. And you could use multiple airfields at the same time. Pardon me. I got the black lung. They don't know that movie. All right.
No.
So this is how things were sizing up for the Japanese defensive positions. Now you notice in this up here, they actually did have a couple battalions that would go up into Motobu Peninsula and Ieshima Island. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is how the bulk of the defenses went. There were some things working against the Japanese, and we'll get to that, but I want you to understand this is what it was looking like. This is where we were coming ashore, and this is where the defenses were actually going to start. To give you a better idea, this is some of the beaches of invasion beaches of Okinawa. This right here is Kadena Air Base now in modern times. And this is now the Higa River. At this time, it's the Bishi River. Everything north of the Bishi River, that was all Marines. Everything south is all U.S. Army. All right. L Day or Love Day. And I'm not saying this to be a jerk, but it was the largest amphibious landing of World War II, possibly history. So if anyone ever tells you that D-Day was the largest amphibious landing, they're a liar and they don't know their history, and you can call them out on it. Here's why we know that. 183,000 service members were in the initial invasion, which is almost 30,000 more than were at D-Day. Think about that. Okinawa is this tiny island in the middle of nowhere in Pacific, and they're sending 30,000 more soldiers to secure that island than they did for the entire continent of Europe. In total, roughly somewhere between 560 and 580,000 sailors, Marines, soldiers, and guardsmen were committed to Okinawa. By the time the battle ends, that number had swelled to over 1 million. There was little to no resistance during the invasion, and that's why I showed you the map earlier. As you can see that there was no Ushijima, who actually commanded on Iwo Jima before Okinawa, decided that he was going to pull all of his defenses back so that he could try to suck in the Americans and get them too far ahead of their supply lines. So this is kind of what the American plan was. And you'll notice here's the beaches again we talked about. Their plan is to divide the island right here, The Marines are going to hard charge through the Kachin Peninsula all the way up through the rest of the island, and they're going to secure this whole area. And then this down here is all going to be the Army. They're going to move down here, and they're going to get going real quick, fast, in a hurry. From April 1st to April 3rd, there was almost no resistance. There would be sporadic sniper fire, sporadic engagements, but nothing consistent. Ushijima was the primary commander, Brigadier General Cho was the secondary, and Colonel Yahara is considered the most tactically brilliant Japanese at the time. Now, the things they had, the reason why, one of the big reasons they consolidated defenses, they lost the 9th Division. When it came down time for Okinawa, they had a pretty good indication that Okinawa was going to be the target, but they still thought Formosa, and we now know as Taiwan, might also be a target. So they opted to take a division from Okinawa and throw it over to Taiwan/Formosa. That division never made it. It sank, and almost the entire division was lost to the ocean. They had used Okinawan slave labor, much like Iwo Jima used Korean slave labor. They used Okinawan slave labor to expand upon the naturally occurring caves and create the tunnels, the hidden artillery sites, the hidden pillboxes, everything like that. Ushijima used everything he had learned throughout the war and instituted it heavily on Okinawa. And his philosophy was 10 men, 1 tank, or 1 plane before death. And that's the philosophy that they went into. Okinawa was another suicide. Now, the Americans started with a bombardment. In fact, it was so complete, they call it the Steel Typhoon, or Typhoon of Steel. And its intensity was even greater than that of Iwo Jima. The reason for that is they realized that, well, we didn't obviously blast Iwo Jima enough, so why don't we blast this one even more? And then they came ashore April 1st, 1945. This is, the rumor behind this photo is that it was taken either by a local Okinawan or a Japanese officer. I don't know the truth of that, but you can even see some of the landing craft are already in the rice fields. Well, this is all American craft getting ready to come ashore. However, there was no enemy there. Almost absolutely none. They just literally walked ashore. In fact, a lot of soldiers and Marines made the comment of, well, I've already lived longer than I thought I would. You see, these landing vehicles, and I'll show this later in another slide, they were telling these people, we're expecting up to 60% casualties. So you first 6 rows out of these 10 rows, we don't expect you to live or to not get out of this unwounded. Again, another shot of them coming ashore, and you can see the smoke clouds from where they're launching onto absolutely nothing. As Ushijima, Cho, and Yahara watched this happen from Shirijo Castle down in the Shiri-Naha neighborhood of Okinawa, the Yaharas supposedly remarked, "What a waste," referring to the amount of ammunition the Americans were using to soften their invasion sites. Now, this is actually at Yellow 2. This is beach number codenamed Yellow 2. What stands here now is kind of funny. It's there's a playground right here nowadays. And there's a picnic site just on the other side, right up on this cliff right here is a picnic site. But this is what it looked like in 1945. But you can see how easily they came ashore. And this is what I'm talking about when they said those first 6 rows, they just told them, you're probably going to die. That's what they anticipated. But you can see these guys, no engagement, they're just strolling ashore. So the battle plan. American plan, they're throwing 7 divisions. And like I said, a division is roughly about 20,000 individuals. They're going to divide the island. Marines are going to go north, Army's going to go south, and then they'll have the island cleared by Christmas. That sort of philosophy. This is what they're bringing for. It's the 10th Army with Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. in command. It's worth noting that this is Buckner's first command ever. He did not command as a lieutenant. He did not command as a captain. He did not command as a major, colonel, whatever. This is his first command ever. And one of the chief reasons he was given this command is he could get along with people. I'm not even making that up. Geiger was one of his good buddies, and I got a good story about that later if we have a chance, but Geiger was commanding the 3rd Amphibious Corps down here. Buckner, his career was a logie. He was a logistician. This was the American idea. Now, something you might, may know but may not know is that I kept talking about April 1st, 1945, but really the Battle for Okinawa started in March when they had to capture the Kurama Islands. The reason why they wanted the Kurama Islands is they knew they were going to get kamikaze. They knew ships were going to get damaged. So their way to counter that was to capture the Kurama Islands, use those semi-safe lagoons, repair the ships enough, and then they could go sail on and get some better repairs later. So they actually captured the Kurama Islands that March. These are the Kurama Islands. You can see the invasion just before the main invasion of the Okinawa kicks off. But they wanted these islands so they could have a safe harbors, so to speak, to do some quick patching on naval ships. Yaitake. Yaitake was the main engagement in the Motobu Peninsula, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but it's worth remembering. The Japanese plan, defend to the last man, and what the big problem was, it was the most significant civilian population to date that they had seen in the Pacific Theater. But this is the Marine plan to go north. They're going to go north, and eventually some Marines are going to go all the way down up and down the island. Now, the 77th Division, that's the one you want to pay attention to. How many here have seen Hacksaw Ridge by a show of hands? The movie Hacksaw Ridge, Mel Gibson, Desmond Doss. That's his unit, is the 77th. And in case you're wondering, I tried to invite him, but Desmond Doss Jr. couldn't be here today. He's actually traveling to his dentist in Mexico. He and I had a chance meeting on Okinawa during the anniversary of his dad's actions. He lives in Owaka, Washington, believe it or not. He works as a fire rescue pilot. Here is what made these two islands terrible. Pay very close attention to this. Now, down here, you see the letter Delta, correct? They could enter in here, and these tunnels indicate hidden. They could pop out anywhere they wanted to on these mountains. And every ridge line, like Hacksaw Ridge, Kakuzu Ridge, Conical Hill, Sugarloaf, Chocolate Drop, all those famous names you hear from this battle, they were all honeycombed like this. How do you count an enemy when you can see the same person 3, 4, 5 times? That's why when we get the accounts of soldiers, they're talking about, oh, we must have killed 3,200. The best example of this is Kakuzu Ridge. The Americans, some to this day, are convinced that it was defended by over 3,200 Japanese Imperial soldiers. The truth is, it was defended by about 12 to 1,500 guys from Kyoto, Japan. But the Americans were counting the same guys 3, 4, 5, 6 times. They just had no idea they were doing it because of this system. Now, this is actually a real location, and this is what it looked like in 1945. Now, the other reason that Okinawa was absolutely terrible, and this is where it really pays attention, I need to know if you can see my cursor. Yes or no?
Yeah.
All right. This is an actual diagram of the battle plan. This is Kakuzu Ridge. This is the Nishibaro Escarpment, the Saddle, Hacksaw Ridge, and the West and East Pinnacles. As the 96 comes down to attack Kakuzu, the problem they found is they can be reinforced with the armaments from Nishibaro here and from the West Pinnacle here. So now they're not just fighting Kakuzu, they're fighting 2 other ridges that they can't even engage. Not to mention, there are sharpshooters and machine guns that this is just in range for. So they can engage as they see American silhouette on Kakuzu. The 27th Infantry Division tried to go take out the West Pinnacle. They lost 30 of their 32 tanks in that one engagement. An entire division's worth of tanks is gone because of the way the defense network is set up. It's an imagine interlocking fields of fire, but instead you have interlocking ridges of fire. No ridge fought alone, and as soon as you get Kakuzu, which took them nearly a month, you had about 800 meters of no cover and concealment to get to Hacksaw Ridge. So they started resorting to things like this. This, I believe, is at Sugarloaf or Chocolate Drop. I'm not sure, but you have artillery impacts. You have the good old-fashioned flamethrowers to burn them out of their caves and tunnels. Then you have the satchel charges. Imagine being this guy if that thing's not set right. You had, for the first time for many of these guys, an urban fighting in Naha. And then this is taken from Wana Ridge. you can see why they call it the Typhoon of Steel. There is nothing living. There is no vegetation living because the American bombardment of their artillery, their mortars, their aircraft, their naval was that complete. Moving onto the Motobu Peninsula, because I don't want to forget our Marine brothers. This is their route up to the Motobu. It was absolutely 100% unopposed until they reached Yaretake. Yaretake was the most significant fight in the Motobu. It actually took the Marines more time to get down from the Motobu to reinforce the army than it did for them to take the Motobu Peninsula and clear it. Pardon me. Again, this is what they're doing here with this bar and this M1 Garand is they're actually going around looking for the pillboxes and the cave entrances on Yaretake. All right, Trey, if anyone can tell me what what ship that is, they deserve a bump, a full letter grade bump in their grade.
No, not a destroyer. No. What's the name of the ship?
I'll take that as they don't. I'll take that as a no.
Should I give him a hint?
No, can't give them a hint. But this, yeah,
the tree was signed on it. Peace treaty was signed on it.
This is.
Who called it? I heard big. There you go. Yeah, she called it.
This is the U.S. Missouri instance before this kamikaze struck it on its side, approximately right here. This is the kamikaze attack that took the Missouri out of the Okinawa fighting to go get repairs, but later that's where the treaty was signed. Believe it or not, this used to be in Bremerton, Washington. You can now find it in Honolulu. But this is how bad the kamikazes were on the U.S. Navy. This is the USS Laffey. The Laffey is a radar ship. The Japanese desperately wanted these radar ships out of commission. And so the Laffey was attacked 23 or 27 times in the course of 2 hours by that many kamikazes. Believe it or not, the Laffey did not sink, but it was taken out of operation. This is the USS Bunker Hill after a kamikaze attack on its deck. Now I talk about the civilian population. It was significant. Now, the problem we had was that we didn't know how to tell Okinawan from Japanese. They are actually two different ethnicities. They are not the same. In fact, the 96 intelligence about the Okinawans versus the Japanese, and it literally said this, they are typically shorter and hairier than the Japanese. That is how you tell them apart. I have no idea how you do that in the heat of combat, but that's what the intelligence was giving to its soldiers. But the problem that we had and where a lot of bad things happened is things like this. He's coming out of a tomb. I can't tell if it's a tomb or a cave where he probably sought shelter and his family's probably down there. And well, he's got two Marines or Army guys with guns on him. He's been told for the past few years that our Americans are going to be here to rape his wife, steal his children, and kill him. He's not going to be very willing to come out of there. I apologize. I've had a cough the past few days. It's not COVID, Trey, so quit saying that. But this is the Okinawans. This is the kind of thing that they were running into all over the island because they were hiding in all those kinds of different caves all over the island. But we dropped a lot of these. This one was picked up August 20th, 1945. The gentleman who picked it up was a U.S. veteran there. He just grabbed one to kind of hold on to it, let us take a high resolution scan of it. But the other problem was this is in Japanese. Most of the Okinawans didn't speak Japanese. They spoke Unitagachi, which is the native Okinawan tongue. They couldn't read this any more than a Japanese person who didn't speak English. But then you get to the cost of Okinawa. This is where it gets pretty bad. 53,000 wounded, estimated. Over 12,000 killed. We have never gotten a full accurate number on how many were missing or actually captured. The Imperial killed 110,000. Never got an accurate estimate on their missing or captured as well. The really scary one is that a place called Peace Memorial Park, which is near the very, very end of the Battle of Okinawa, They are still counting civilians there. I've heard estimates go up to 275,000, but most academics agree somewhere between 90 to 200,000 is accurate for Okinawa civilians who were either killed by crossfire or by suicide. And when I say by suicide, there were suicide cliffs there. And what would typically happen is a mother would take her children there and throw her children off the cliff and then throw herself because she didn't want to hold her babies while she committed suicide for fear of turning and absorbing the blow and letting the child live to deal with the Americans. The other thing they do is in the caves, they would be given grenades or artillery shells or mortar shells by the Japanese and a hammer. They would get the children to huddle around those incendiary devices or those explosive devices, and then that way they would ensure that the kids would be killed. That way they would be spared the Americans. And that happened at a place called Sad Cave, where everyone inside of it committed suicide via the explosives the Imperial Japanese had given them. Unlike Iwo Jima, there was almost daily hand-to-hand combat. When I say hand-to-hand combat, I mean actual hand-to-hand combat. In fact, in his book, 82 Days on Okinawa, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Colonel Robert Shaw talks about some of the hand-to-hand combat that they experienced. And to finish this out, though, are there any questions before I kind of get towards the finish here? I know I'm not trying to take up too much of your time. There's just so much to cover about these. It's hard to cover them accurately. But this is one of the 4, make sure I get this right, 6 American cemeteries on Okinawa. And they were all as full as this. If you'll notice very closely on the cemetery on the right, you can see the Star of David's. But these are the chapels that they would have near constant funerals. And it cost Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. his life. He is the highest ranking KIA for the Americans in the entirety of World War II. He was an interesting character. Geiger was his friend, but Geiger got so fed up with this micromanagement that at one time Geiger got wind that Buckner was coming to visit him. And so what Geiger did was pack up his entire headquarters, which was no easy task for a 2-star general, and move it 3 miles down the road. And he left a single tent, a clerk with a typewriter, and a light bulb to greet the general when he got there. And that's kind of the thing he got, is that wherever Buckner went, everyone quickly learned that that's where the enemy was going to fire, because his Jeep Caravan was about 82 long. He never wore subdued rank. He always wore the largest, flashiest rank he could. And look closely at that photo. Does everybody see that rock that the general is standing next to? Right here? That is where a mortar struck, and the shrapnel from the rock is what killed the general. He bled out on the spot. But we were capturing Japanese. They knew this was the end, and they were surrendering left and right. Even the Boitai. The Boitai are the Okinawan conscripts, and there's about 22,000 of them. And the rule was, if you could hold the sharpened bamboo spear, you could fight for the emperor. And you would have kids as young as 8, 9, and 10 charging Americans with sharpened bamboo spears. Now, a vast majority of the Boitai threw down their weapons and they surrendered immediately to the Americans because, in their mind, they were being oppressed by the Imperial Japanese and they wanted out of it. But this is what it was all building to. This is what it was all building to. Iwo Jima took 3 divisions. We walked away with 2. Okinawa took 7 divisions. We walked away with a little over 5. Correction, a little over 4. And this is what we're building to. Now, let this sink in for a minute, because the reason why I want it to sink in is take a good look up here at Operation Coronet. Does everybody see how that WIA, that KA, is significantly more than this one down here in Operation Olympic? All right. I can see you, so just someone give me a thumbs up that you see that. Thank you. The U.S. government was willing to write this invasion off as a failure in order to allow this one to succeed. They did not anticipate that the Tokyo invasion here would succeed. And so you have well over 1 million Americans written off because that's not the one they wanted to succeed. And that's the choice Truman was facing. Did he risk millions of Americans wounded and millions dead on top of the millions of Japanese casualties? Or did he drop 2 atomic bombs and potentially end the conflict? It's a difficult choice. I mean, how do you weigh that hundreds of thousands of lives versus other millions of lives? But had the Japanese not surrendered after Nagasaki and Hiroshima, Kyoto, Kobe, Osaka, Nagago, Fuka, see what I went, Mutsu, they were all on the list to be bombed. Up to 15 atomic bombs were being prepared to be dropped all over Japan. The US government, the US military, MacArthur being one of them, was advocating for that. Now, before we get going, I already showed you one book about the American account for the Battle for Okinawa. So if you want some extra reading on the battle of an account there, here's a good American one. I just finished it recently by Colonel Robert Shaw. He passed away about 2 weeks after that book was finished and published. Colonel Yahara, instead of committing seppuku with Brigadier General, with General Ushijima and General Cho, he was told to live, and he wrote this. This is the Japanese account of the Battle for Okinawa by Colonel Yahara. He was actually discovered dressed as a peasant trying to make his way back to Tokyo. Now, but as a special treat, I thought I'd show you guys and gals this. This is a 105 millimeter shell casing that was battle used during Iwo Jima. And I know that for a fact because of where I found it, which was on Iwo Jima, about 30 to 40 meters away from where the actual firing point was. But it's actually in pretty remarkable shape for being almost 80 years old. And in case he asks again, no, Major Ingram, I will not mail it to you because I know you won't mail it back. But when you go to Iwo Jima, if you ever get selected to go to Iwo Jima, you have to go to Okinawa first. To get to Okinawa, you probably want to branch ADA or MP or become one of the special boys, the special kids. That's about the only way you get to Okinawa. There's a large contingency of ADA, some logistics, semi-big condition of MPs, and then some special forces. So if you want to get to Okinawa, I would recommend going ADA or MP. But when you go there, you can pick this up. This is sand from 3 different invasion beaches in a sake bottle that I also found on Iwo Jima. Now, I know.
I'll send it back.
No. Again, the answer is no. You're supposed to send me a bottle so I can fill one for you.
I might have 1 or 2 later on.
Now, before I get going, I understand I went over this really, really quickly. That's because there is so much to talk about these battles. I could easily fill hours-long discussions with them. If you want a more detailed discussion, I did do 2 podcasts with a person from Key Battles in American History, James Early, and we did one on Iwo Jima, we did one on Okinawa, and he is doing one on the entire key battles of the American Pacific Theater, because that's where his dad fought. And so he's actually got a very, very good series that he goes into a much greater detail about the battles of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. So if you want a more detailed discussion about that for a podcast, that's the one I recommend, is Key Battles in American History. With that, are there any questions that I could answer for you folks with the few minutes that we have remaining? Anything at all, I'm happy to talk about it. But as a fun side note, if you look closely here on the map, you see this Nininami Iwo Jima? Is there anybody in there who's a Harry Potter fan by a show of hands? Don't lie, I know Major Ingram is. Well, this is apparently where the Japanese School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is in Japan, is this island just south of Iwo Jima here. So if you ever go to Iwo Jima and look south, you can see the Harry Potter, the Japanese equivalent of the Hogwarts. Oh, come on, that one was funny. Any questions at all about those battles that I can answer for you? I know probably a lot more than I'm saying, so please feel free to ask anything you might want.
Did you get those videos loaded up? You took the flyovers?
Yeah, if you can give me a minute, I can get to those.
Yeah, we got a few minutes. I think it'd be kind of cool to see the modern day flyover of it.
Yeah, there it is. I had to find my external, sorry. Okay, that's not the right one. Give me one quick second and I'll find it. Sorry, gotta find the right file here. I think this is it. Nope, that's the wrong one. I have to get on the internet. It's not letting me get on the internet here. Why is that?
What now?
To do it, I gotta. It's easier for me to. Here we go. Easier for me to find it here. Give me one quick second. I apologize for the delay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry to throw that on you. I just thought it was kind of cool to look at.
No, let me get it. Let me get it pulled up here. Pause. Okay. Share. Okay, what you're going to see is a time-lapse approach to Iwo Jima. This is on in the front windshield of a KC-135 refueler. It's going to bank hard to the left, and you're going to see the island emerge out of nothing. There it is. And that's when my camera fell down. Okay, let's go back. And then this one is from the side of a C-130, and they just took off. So they're going to turn right. So Suribachi would be to their left. This is a bunch of junk that crashed there in the 60s, has no significance to World War II. But this will take you around the entire island, and you'll get to see the big reason why they chose that side they did. Is that too loud?
No. No, there's actually no sound if there's sound on that video.
Okay, it's just the engines. You can't hear anything else.
Okay.
This whole area right here did not exist in 1945.
Barking or something, you know?
Yeah, this whole area right here did not exist in 1945. That is brand new terrain since 45. This over here, this is where you would find the meat grinder. But this is why they didn't choose the north part of the island. Do you think the Marines would have had any fun climbing those cliffs right then in 1945? Probably not. The island today is constantly emitting sulfur. So the entire time you're on the island, it's kind of runs in between a cow fart and rotten eggs the entire time. And that's all you smell. All of this terrain here, that vegetation is where the beach was in 1945. This was all underground, correction, underwater. You can just make out the towers of the modern airfield today, right there. And there you can see Suribachi in the greater distance. But again, this was all underwater in 1945. They would have been right up against those cliffs. And see, here's the rock quarry. And then these are all the landing beaches right up to Suribachi. And if it looks like this thing is tilting really badly, it is. They drove this thing like it was a fighter plane. Only time I've been airsick in my entire life. But the second berm is up here, and there's this whole area right here, the really black stuff, that was all underwater, all of it. Futatsu Rock is roughly in this area here, right here, and it was underwater in 45. There it is right there. So you can see kind of blurry, but this was all underwater in 45. This is Suribachi today. This side is relatively untouched. Well, this side has been redesigned thanks to the Navy. See, become a historian, go see and do really cool things. That's all I can tell you about that. So, but if you want to see more Iwo Jima videos, this is a channel that is mine on YouTube. If you go to the playlists, I have one that is just for Iwo Jima. So you can see tunnel videos. This is a slideshow that's 9 minutes long that will talk you through the entire tour that I took people through. So with that, are there any questions I can answer about Okinawa or Iwo Jima for you guys? And
Any other
gals?
questions?
Where can I find the podcast?
You can find that podcast through Apple Podcasts or Spotify is where I found it. The ones that I did are going to become available because they're only right now for his Patreon customers. They'll become available, I believe, around December, January. But he does have his other free ones up on Apple and Spotify.
Answer your question. Hey, Evan, appreciate it, man. Thank you. Great job.
Yeah.
Guys, enjoy it. I mean,
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. And I'll talk to you later, Major Ingram.
all right, I think they're just thankful they didn't have to listen to me all. All right, thank you.
Thank you.